valid business email address and domain to receive your $15 gift card. So we do appreciate your time. So a little overview of today's webinar. What can you do? What do you want to document? So that's one of the first questions we ask a lot of people that come to Graphical Networks. They're asked, oh, I need to document my network. But what does that mean? If you ask that to many different people, they'll give you many different responses. One, I want to see all my network assets. Two, I want to see all my network assets and how are they connected? Is that even possible? Others also ask for a lot more stuff than basically documenting your network. They're also asking a lot of monitoring type questions. Can I monitor my network? If a device is down, is there any way I can see that live in real time? So really, what is it that you're looking to document? And what can you automatically discover? As I mentioned earlier, our NetTerrain product, it primarily uses SNMP, network discovery, to go out and discover your network, your network assets, as well as connections. Now, there are a lot of tools out there that does agents or agent lists. We are an agent list discovery. So that's one of the questions you probably need to ask some of your network vendors out there. Are all my devices SNMP enabled? Maybe you should ask your network admin, or if you're the network admin yourself, you should be able to answer that question. So if it's not SNMP enabled, then a lot of network discovery tools cannot help you unless you run an agent on every single network device. So how easy is it? Is it just a matter of hit and scan and push to see your network diagrams? We'll show you how you can do that in NetTerrain. So there are 2 polling questions. I will start them up. So first question, how do you currently document your network? Are you using spreadsheets? Are you using Visio diagrams? Are you using a combination of Visio and spreadsheets? Do you have a person that knows your entire network and everything's all in his or her brain? Or do you currently not have anything documented? Or other could be if you have a network monitoring system like your SolarWinds or PRTG that already has a network discovery component, but it's lacking the network mapping that you're looking to do for network documentation. So I'll give this another 10 seconds and I'll close this poll. So it seems like it's almost a neck and neck tie between, actually it's really close to, let me end this, I'll show this to you. So it looks like it's a lot of people use spreadsheets, Visio, combination, as well as a coworker that knows everything. So I'll stop sharing this. The next polling question is for today. For today's demo that Jason's going to be providing, what are you mostly interested in learning about today in this webinar? Are you looking to automatically discover your devices, the properties, connections? If you currently have a third-party application like ServiceNow or SolarWinds, how can you connect that into a program like NetTerrain and visualize and map your network? If you have currently Visio diagrams, spreadsheets, can you easily import that into a solution like NetTerrain? Or are you interested in our APIs? NetTerrain has a robust API feature set. It uses REST APIs. It can connect to basically any third-party application that uses REST APIs. So I will end this poll. And it looks like most people are looking to automatically discover your devices, properties, and connections. And it's a two-way tie between third-party connectors and spreadsheet import and Visio import. So we'll focus more on the automatic discovery devices. If we have time, or maybe I could ask Jason to mention a little bit about our connectors and our other import features within NetTerrain. So I'll stop the sharing. Oops. All right, I think that's it. All right. And the next slide is see NetTerrain in action. So I will stop my share. I'll let Jason go through a quick demo of our NetTerrain software. It should take about 10 minutes. And then after that, we have about 5-6 minutes left for any type of Q&A type session. So I'll pass it off to Jason.
Oh, thanks, Fred. So, for those of you not familiar, our product is something called NetTerrain. That's what you see on my screen right now. This is the top level of NetTerrain. This is a demo project, so it's full of different diagrams and stuff just to kind of show off features, functionalities, etc., answer questions. Normally, when you start with our software product, you're really starting at the top level with a blank sheet of paper, the blank diagram. So, if you were using Visio, you open Visio up and you have basically a white piece of paper kind of staring at you, and you got to do something in it. Well, we're not sort of dissimilar from that standpoint. If I were to go into something like an area like my sandbox here is pretty much empty, minus my little object there. You'd start here and go, hey, what do I do? How do I get started, etc. And with NetTerrain, you either read documentation or you take training or whatever it happens to be. But for the most part, I mean, the tool itself on the right-hand side, you have this collection of object types. These are things that you can add to the system as well. You don't need anybody to do that for you, but and you can do things, like drag and drop something. I can go and find an object type and be like, oh, I want to use certain widget, server, router, etc. Go and search for it and drag it in, and then start to build out diagrams, right? Create connections and so on. Well, what would a diagram be that you might want to create? Well, it could be as simple as I just want to do a logical. I shouldn't say simple. Some logical drawings are very complicated and not always easy to do. This one's I don't think is terribly difficult. This kind of shows an overall topology of a network or networks and connectivity and so on. But if we, maybe go out into some other things where we've got sort of high level network things connected together across, multiple buildings or multiple sites, like I have there, multiple buildings. In my case, is sort of a campus example environment. You drill down into it, and you have different wiring closets and data centers and that sort of thing. Lots of connections, lots of information, and maybe it's not documented too well, or maybe it's not really automated, right? So, and you want to be able to create documentation, maybe like this, rack and stack. Maybe it's more logical, or just some flat drawings to give you the overall sort of view of the network and that sort of thing. So, but again, as Fred sort of mentioned, the first question you always run into is, yeah, it's great that you can drag and drop things, and that's pretty easy, and drag connections, and learn how to use the tool. And you can bulk import using something like Excel, but maybe there's other data points you have already, or you'd like the system just to go do some sort of discovery, right? And so, how do we discover maybe connections or at least the equipment? And that kind of thing. Well, primarily we discover off of SNMP would be an actual discovery. So you don't know what you have out there. You want to do a discovery. But with any kind of discovery process, you do have to know something typically. I mean, you have to know that SNMP is enabled or turned on. You have to know that, hey, this is kind of what I'm going after. These are the IP address or addresses, or at least some range that you have to assume, or you have to have some knowledge. You can't just plop us on the network and be like, here, go to discovery. That's usually more port scanners and that kind of thing to see what's responding. And then you kind of build from there, right? I mean, there's good tools out there that do that as well. But they can't typically get into the device and sort of interrogate it, so to speak, or at least you hope they can't. But so what we have is, let me go find my thing that I want to share here. Here we go. Um, so this is our collector. You guys should see this now. I'm sharing this through a remote desktop session. It's on my Mac. So our collector runs on Windows machines. So our collector, I have it running on a Mac. It's actually in our lab network in the office. So I'm sorry it's a little grainy, but it's not too bad. But this is our what we call the collector, and this is where you have network documentation and you want to build network documentation. But how do I go about the process of hopefully automating this at some level, right? To get to full 100% network documentation, automation, etc. To get there, there's certain things you'd have to do, and just SNMP is probably not going to cut it. You're probably going to need to integrate with some other systems. You might have to also just manually put in some data, Excel import, etc. Because when you get down to it, there's some things that aren't discoverable. I mean, typically patch panels, right? They're not IP based. I mean, there's some out there you could buy, but most people don't have those. So, that kind of thing. Certainly, if you want to show physical hierarchies, buildings, floors, rooms, etc., those are things you just have to kind of bring in or bring from another system. But with respect to Discovery SNMP, so this is our collector. It runs as an application on a server or a desktop, laptop, wherever you kind of want to run it. As I mentioned, is Windows you'd be running it on. So if I, on the right-hand side here, the way you configure this is you go in and you put in an IP address range or ranges. You configure your version for SNMP, your credentials. You can use the device as a seed, so individual IP, say it's a seed to pick a router, and it'll get more data from that and kind of build out other discoveries from what it's seen as far as IP addresses in that seed device. What are you collecting or what data are you going to capture from something like this? Again, well, it's SNMP, so you're getting really SNMP data. Now, there's a baseline of SNMP data that we capture. I'll talk about that in a second. If I go to advanced, you'll see a few things that come up. Device, that would be the device that you're actually discovering. The connection, so there's some different connectivity things we're going to try and tap into: CDP, LLDP, some layer 2, some routing tables, IP tables, and so on. Port information, we're going to try and grab some port data as far as, the port level detail from the device and what's connected to what. So we try and build out a port-to-port connection where we can. VLAN data, so if we know there's port information, there's VLAN at the port, we'll try and build data from that. Usually there's a report associated with that. It's not necessarily, you kind of have to see that in your world. And then installed, so for SNMP devices where we can get applications, usually for like a Windows server or laptop, desktop where you have SNMP enabled, we'll pull the installed list from it for SNMP. You don't have to do any of those or all of those. I mean, certainly device would certainly make sense. I don't think you can get anything else without that at least. And then there's a tab for connectivity, other stuff, and so on, some other settings and some global settings you can take advantage of as well. Those are just the details of the sort of the configuration and setup that you might get into. So once you do this, you configure this, and again, you can have multiple ranges in. In fact, you could import multiple ranges from a sheet, etc. So you do that, and you go and basically you set up a scan. You say, okay, I'm going to scan the network now. Now, you do not have to do that manually all the time. You can set this up where you do a scheduler. So you install the collector as a service, and then you can set up a polling, or you can set up both polling and discovery. So discovery, you basically go through the cycle. You say, okay, every night I'm going to discover, or every 5 minutes or whatever it is, whatever makes sense for your environment. Some people don't want this thing just running all the time, doing SNMP gets and so on. And what's the point of that if the environment really doesn't change that much? Why kind of do that? Now you may get status more often because you can use this as sort of a I won't say monitoring from the standpoint of something like SolarWinds or a big monitoring tool. But if you're trying to get status, hey, is this thing responding? It was responding before. If it stopped responding, hey, I want some sort of alert. That type of stuff we can do. So you do have some things you can do from that standpoint as far as sort of looking for status changes in the environment. So this thing goes out, does it scan, collects data, and And then you end up with discovered information devices. So it tells you, what got discovered, how much stuff. This is just hidden in a lab environment, so there's not a ton of stuff out there. Installed applications for some of the devices and so on. So and then some connectivity information. So what happens? You discover data. What happens from there? Well, you push data. You say, oh, I'm going to push this data out. Well, where are you pushing it to? Well, you're pushing it to a NetTerrain server, of course. So there's settings you bring in here and say, okay, put my user and password in that I'm going to use for pushing data, server, etc. So we're using our APIs to do this for delivering data from collector. Right? You can imagine, you've got different networks around the world, or you have different networks locally, or they're firewalled. Maybe they can't communicate. You can't communicate from one discovery to all your networks. You could deploy these out in different places, or maybe you're going on the road. You got to go do a discovery somewhere. You just bought a new company and you want to scan their network and start to get a feel for their documentation and so on. So you could go do that discovery, and then you could push the data to the server. You don't have to push it, or maybe you can't get to the server from here, from wherever you are. You can technically save the data as well. I can save the data and then push it later. Once load the data up to a different collector tool, and then push the data. And I'll show you what sort of the data collection push looks like in a second. I'm not going to do it here. It takes a little bit of time. Not a ton of time, but discovery and all that, it's more than I certainly have in this webinar. Well, not really, but anyway, and what I would say is if this is something of interest, you guys should just try it out. I mean, you can go to our site, sign up, download the collector, put in a couple IPs, do a get, or discovery, push data, and you'll see how the whole thing basically works. Or we can help you, walk you through the process of how to set it up and what you're going to see, expectations, and that sort of thing, right? So, but these are the things you do. Now, there's other discovery things in here. So ServiceNow, SolarWinds. Now, these are not going out and doing SNMP. They're actually communicating with those systems. So we're using those system APIs. And if I click at ServiceNow, there's a few different tables that we're tapping into data-wise. Now, the nice thing about system data as opposed to just discovery is if you're using ServiceNow or SolarWinds or some of these other ones that are in here, or even a system that's not listed, it doesn't really matter if they have APIs. We can talk to you about putting a connector in for it. The nice thing about that is the fact that getting data out of those systems with APIs, usually it's very robust. So even if there's something not here, like in my ServiceNow, maybe there's a table of data that you need to tap into. Adding that's typically very straightforward because, well, it's an API and we've already have APIs in there. We're already doing calls, pulling data. So we have some white papers on our website about people using the ServiceNow API or the connector. I don't know if I have one out there for SolarWinds, but SolarWinds is nice. SolarWinds typically already doing SNMP discovery, so why do it twice? Just take the data that SolarWinds has got, their nodes at least. Nodes and connections, sometimes you'll get links in SolarWinds too. I think it depends on modules and stuff you get from them. But the point is there's usually devices in there, and then you can start pulling the data and, taking advantage of all that. So, which is, I don't know. For me, it's certainly a way to use data that you have and not necessarily rediscover things. There's some chat stuff going on. I'm going to just want to check real quick. Okay, so Fred is answering some questions there. So yeah, if you guys have questions, you can throw it in the chat, or you can use the Q&A. I don't know, however you guys want to do that. Anyway, I'm going to stop this share for a second. I'm going to go back to sharing my this guy here, my Chrome. And I'll talk about sort of discovery and sort of what you see. So let's start here with this diagram here. This is actually what I discovered in the collector and pushed the data. So I didn't really manipulate anything per se. I think I spread the objects out a little bit because normally the objects sort of end up in the upper left corner or the top, but we have tools, arrange, and some other tools to help you sort of spread all these things out. I mean, you can move everything. It's really easy, and you can add bend points. So if you want to sort of, start to really kind of shape what the diagram looks like after you do discovery. And there's different page sizes and other things too. And I don't have anything turned on really as far as displayed. Like I can turn the nodes on or the links, but usually links are usually pretty a lot of data information there I don't need to see. But the point of this is it's kind of showing you what got discovered. And like, well, what about the stuff that's just kind of gray circles? What are those ugly things? Well, those could be objects that don't have a match in our catalog. And what I mean by match, well, so what happens when you do a discovery is this. You put your IP address ranges in, it goes to as a discovery, then you push data into NetTerrain. You say, okay, I've got all this stuff, let me push it in and have it draw something for me. And it draws something. But we don't always know what this is from the standpoint of, is this a Cisco 3750 or is it a 2900 or what is it? Well, we're looking at the system object ID, which should be unique and should match something in our catalog, but not always. We don't have everything. But what's nice is I think we've made a pretty nice system, easy system to use from the standpoint of two things. One is mapping an object that's discovered to a catalog object, right? You don't have to go in and modify a bunch of tables and, files and other stuff. You literally take an OID like I have here that's discovered and copy it. And I go over to my catalog, which again, some of this stuff you're not going to be familiar with, of course. It's a new tool. I'm just kind of showing it off. But if I go into my catalog and I can go and look something up, a device, whatever it happens to be, and I go, oh, well, I know that's a, a Power Edge server or something. And I go find Power Edges and I look for the specific model and that sort of thing. And I scroll across and there's this column here called System OID. And I literally just paste the OID in and go, so what happens? Now what happens is, it's not going to change it right now, but what's going to happen is when it does a push of data again, it's going to refresh and it's going to know what that OID is supposed to relate to in our catalog. And it's going to update it and create that object for me, that device type. So just like that, now I've got things, matched and modeled and everything looks like a device and it's starting to look like my network, right? Which is great. There's certainly not a ton of work there. I mean, I'm just copying an OID and throwing it into in my catalog thing. Now, yeah, something might not even be in the catalog. That's okay. If you're a customer, you can either create it yourself or you can request it from us and we'll create it for you. So pretty easy to do that too. What about additional data I want to capture from an object? I've got all these fields here, but what if I want to add a new field and I want to bring in a piece of data like, I don't know, power or temperature, or maybe there's some magic piece of data in there that I know there's an SNMP, OID for. Well, again, we make it pretty easy. I mean, literally, each object type has its own data fields. I can go in and create a new data field. If I could type some magic data, right? Submit that. And it creates that field for me for that object type, right? Yeah, great. So, and when I go across to the right-hand side, there's my some magic data, and here's a field called System OID. So I can put the OID in for whatever it is I'm trying to get as far as data goes. And now what happens is when the system goes and does a discovery, it says, hey, there's an OID here for this particular piece of data, this field for this object type. I better go interrogate the device for that data and bring it back. And that's what happens. It's great. So nothing terribly hard to do, except, of course, you got to learn a little bit of something about the system to do a few of these things and make it work and sort of bring out the power in the system, I think. Now, these objects that are discovered, it's nice because these things can be moved. They don't have to stay in this diagram. In fact, if I created a whole nother diagram, that one of those data centers or something, I could copy this or cut it and move it, or I could even take it and leave it in this diagram, this logical drawing, and I could take it and move it to maybe a different drawing. Maybe I go into my network drawings, my higher education network here, and maybe I'm going to pop this into some data center, or maybe there's a wiring closet I want to throw this in, or something else, right? So, for instance, let me go in here. Sorry, some of these diagrams are a bit of a mess. I'm sort of on one of my test servers here. So if I navigate down to this particular area here. This wiring closet, which I don't know, doesn't seem to want to respond to me. So there it goes. But you can see I got some pictures in here. You can actually sort of grab pictures and bring those in if you want. It's nice because you can, kind of show what it looks like. I don't really have any space in here, but that's okay. I'm going to just alias this object in, and I'll drag it into my rack here and plop it in. So now it's in two places. It's in my rack, but it's also still in my logical drawing. So, those are next steps, right? I mean, first step for everybody is, hey, let me just discover something and see what I'm seeing in my network, and then kind of get going from there, right? So anyway, hope that was helpful. I'm running out of time here. I'm going to stop my share. I'm going to see if there's any other questions here. Looks like Fred's been taking care of some of these. Actual port number the devices are connected to. It'll show port-to-port connections. Again, that depends on what it can discover in your network. I'm not going to say it's absolutely going to happen. Again, it kind of depends on the devices, LLDP, CDP, and other things, other factors. So, Fred actually answered that. So, connections, we do layer 2 and CDP, LDP. I always tell you to try it out in your environment. It's not that big a deal to sign up and download. I'm not saying it's going to be like, as Fred mentioned, the magic red button. You're going to press a button and everything's just going to be lined up with the stars. But I don't think there's a lot of time invested to see if it's going to be helpful or not for you. And again, we're always willing to have a call with you and kind of walk you through it. After you sign up, reach out to Fred or one of the other sales folks and just schedule a time, 30 minutes. Download and install the collector. Put some IPs in and, have a call with us. You'll press the button, do some scanning, discovery, and we can help you push data and just walk you through what you're seeing and how you kind of maybe clean things up a bit. But network documentation is not, there's nothing automatic about it. If you want, certainly there are tools out there that do a lot more than what we do and cost a lot more than what we cost. So, depends on what you're looking for. Maybe we're the right fit, or maybe there's one of those tools you need, or maybe there's something else you need. And maybe that's, Visio and Excel. Those are good tools too. So anyway, if there's any other questions, let us know. But top of the hour or half hour or whatever, thanks for your time. Really appreciate it. Fred, I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to add.
No, that's it. Thank you everyone for your time. So in the chat, if you do want to try out NetTerrain, if you go to our other website, which is netterrain.us, it's a 14-day online trial. You can go out and download the collector. In order to download the collector, you need to go under Help, Utilities, then Collector. It will download the collector for you. And one of my colleagues, Fred Young, will follow up as well, see if you guys have any additional questions, as well as if you're interested, we can also talk about pricing as well. So thank you everyone for your time. We do appreciate it. And again, for those that are looking for the DoorDash gift card, my marketing team will start processing this pretty soon, so you should be getting that within the hour. So thank you everyone for your time. Have a great day. And again, any questions, feel free to contact us. Actually, let me share my screen really quick. So again, my name is Fred Ko. My email address is right here, fred.ko@graphicalnetworks.com. My other colleague, Fred Young, can also be reached at fred.young@graphicalnetworks.com. So thank you so much for your time. You guys have a great day.
Hey, thanks everybody. Bye-bye.